Pokemon cards are falling rapidly, though the question everyone's asking right now is, should I sell my collection? And I'm going to be unpacking that answer throughout this video. Now also for some good news, I actually am gifting a subscriber this Alolan Dugtrio illustration rare. To know if you won this card, if I do reply to your comment with this Jirachi emoji, then congrats, this card is coming your way. And hey, if you are a newcomer to the channel, welcome. My name's Phil and I simplify the world of Pokemon cards. Feel free to subscribe as it's always great to see new people on the channel. But as I was saying, the panic has now set in and demand is definitely looking weaker than it was before. Now, the most important area to understand right now is that Pokemon TCG Pocket is one of the key reasons for this newfound demand that we've all had within 2025. And you know, if you don't believe me, well, TCG Player actually showcases the market price shifts since the moment that Pokemon TCG Pocket released. Now, as you can see here, there's a pretty huge jump with card prices that align very closely with the release of Pokemon TCG Pocket. But I mean, a word of caution, okay? Because correlation doesn't always mean causation. And the two things we need to remember when we're looking at this data, or you know, whatever, the data as you guys like to say, is that number one, Surging Sparks released at the same time, which was one of the most hyped Pokemon sets. And number two, that Prismatic Evolutions was just about to release during this time period. And of course, this was always going to bring a lot more attention to the hobby. But you know, as a collector myself, I do personally feel that Pokemon TCG Pocket was a huge reason for the new popularity of Pokemon cards, because I was creating content during this time period, okay? And I actually noticed a huge shift in viewer traffic on my channel around that same time. And I just feel the timing is just way too convenient to be brushed off as a coincidence. But you know, in terms of selling your collection right now, okay, one thing you need to know is if Pokemon TCG Pocket is the big reason for this massive Pokemon hype movement for the cards, well, what happens if people stop playing Pokemon TCG Pocket and the new influx of fans starts leaving? I mean, it is something to keep in mind, though I think looking at some of the popular cards and, you know, the prices of these cards is important because we can kind of make sense of the market. All right, big one to talk about is the Magikarp illustration rare from Paldea Evolved. Massive, massive hyped card. People love this card. I like this card. I think it's great, though I do think, and this is me being totally honest with you, I think the price for this card has gotten way too out of hand, considering it is an illustration rare and considering, you know, like there's just so many things about this card that I think it's a bit overinflated. Now, the problem with Pokemon cards right now, if someone says that something's overinflated, like what I'm doing with the Magikarp, is that it is likely in 2-3 years time, it's probably going to even be, you know, there's a chance it could be even more expensive than the prices I'm showing you now. And then people say, oh, see, like you said it was overinflated. But, you know, at the end of the day, when you're still paying 300 USD for a card, that's a lot of money, okay? So let's just check this one out here. So right here, we can see that in the last 3 months, the Magikarp was selling for $267, went all the way up to $402. So it did become a $400 card, which is, you know, crazy to think about, okay? It definitely is difficult to pull, but, you know, when I think of that value bump and how much it's gone up in price, you know, seeing that it wasn't even that expensive when it released with Paldea Evolved in 2023, I just remember this card was $170. So to see it at that price point, you know, it's a real big value increase. And right now it's kind of dropped to $317. Now, you know, that's a pretty significant drop, right? That's $80 pretty, you know, within like a few weeks, okay? And here's the thing, now a lot of people are a little bit worried. You know, people have just gotten very used to and very comfortable seeing their collections just grow. You know, you buy Pokemon cards, it doesn't matter what price you pay for them. Hey, they've just been linear growth throughout this year. And I think this is very good to see. Though, like I said, with what I mentioned about Pokemon TCG Pocket, we know that that brought so many people into the hobby. But what if a lot of these people leave, you know, next year or, you know, 2027, if it can't really keep up that massive demand? You know, Pokemon Go brought in a lot of people, you know, in 2016, if you were around during that time or played Pokemon Go, you know, streets were covered with people, right? In Australia, like the local council actually had to come in and kind of say that people can't play Pokemon Go in this one area because the streets were so filled up with people. Now, I mean, Pokemon Go is still popular, but it's kind of leveled out to a normal player base. And I think Pokemon TCG Pocket is going through that shift. But don't forget, you had a huge influx of people come in. Something to keep in mind. Now, also as a quick one, if you are a fan of graded Pokemon cards and you like to see the most up-to-date analytics, that does bring me to today's video sponsor, Sushi Grade. Now, Sushi Grade is a fantastic analytics platform designed for Pokemon card collectors who who care about making strategic grading moves. Knowing which cards to grade can be confusing, though instead of digging through all the data yourself, Sushi Grade lays out everything you need. For example, on Sushi Grade's grading tab, it highlights cards with the biggest profit potential. Whenever you're looking at this, just remember to research the average chances to get a PSA 10 for each card so you can actually make every decision with confidence. There's also a powerful cross-grading tab. Here you can see which slabs would get a value bump if they got cross-graded. Now what's so cool is that you can actually unlock all the premium features with the promo code that you're seeing on screen right now. This promo code will save you 10% off your first month. You can find all the details in the video's description. A huge thanks to Sushi Grade for supporting the channel. Now let's jump back into this video. Now just moving on to the graded versions of these cards, okay? Now, interestingly, I'm on the Magikarp illustration RAM. We can see that it just recently got 4 bids and it's still sold for $2,000, which is very, very expensive still for a PSA 10 graded card. Right now, the Magikarp in PSA 10 is getting a huge value bump from its raw copy. When you look at something that's selling for $320 and the PSA 10 counterpart sells for so much, the big reason there is because it is a very difficult card to get as a PSA 10. The Magikarp currently is under 20%. I think it might even be 16% off the top of my head the last time I checked, or 18%. It is so rare to get this as a PSA 10, okay? And because of that, there is a massive price discrepancy between the raw and the PSA 10 counterpart. That is something you really need to know as well if you're grading your cards or if you're buying graded slabs. Pokemon is one of the rare TCGs where, the PSA 10 cards, especially in the Scarlet and Violet era, and it's probably going to be likely that it'll be the same for the Mega Evolution era unless there has been like a big difference in the print quality. But there has been a big price differences between raw and PSA 10. A lot of TCGs do not have such price differences. When you look at Dragon Ball, right? Because I collect a lot of Dragon Ball, you will not see these, massive like 5 or 6 times price increases for a raw versus PSA 10. In fact, a lot of Dragon Ball cards have like a 95% chance to get a PSA 10, whereas Pokemon definitely doesn't have that. And that is being a little bit of a thing where collectors are gravitating a little bit more towards graded cards, especially the PSA 10 versions, because they're like, well, if I'm gonna collect this card, I may as well get it in the best kind of version I can get it in right now, because as the years go on, it's likely if it's in a bind or if it's getting traded at card shows, there's always a chance that every time you trade that card, or every time you look at it in a binder or flip those pages, as the years go on, you can get small little damages, right? And you don't know how people look after their cards. So that's why I think a lot of people are opting for PSA 10 cards, and whether or not people are going to be selling their PSA 10s right now, it just depends where the market's heading. PSA 10s have a lot of value. They store an incredible amount of value in one slab. That also means there's more risk, okay? So because they're so expensive, they do have much more room to drop. It's something to keep in mind. Now, just moving on to Paldean Fates Mew, you can see that this one had 61 bids and sold for $1,775, and the day before sold for $1,575. So, about a $200 difference between these two. It's kind of crazy to see that. I do think Bubble Mew is a very iconic card. I do think that it's also grown to just some insane levels lately. But like I said, PSA 10 cards, they have far more value that is stored right there. And because they are so kind of high in price, there is so much room for these to come down. And like, I remember in the last vintage boom, you saw cards, there was heaps actually that were like selling for like, $15,000, $20,000 for a PSA 10 slab, these first editions. Sure, a lot of them have now come back to that price point, but when it dropped, it dropped. Like when it rains, it pours. That's what was happening with the vintage crash that happened in like 2023 to 2024. Now they've all recovered and, vintage is definitely wanted again, though a lot of kind of important things happen to get it back there as well. So, seeing those price points, for these graded cards is interesting, though will graded cards be a little bit more protected during this time, or will they drop more? We really need to keep an eye on the market at this stage. And just moving on to the raw version of Paldean Fates, you can see in the last month selling for $645 US. And of course, right now it's selling for $576. Pretty big kind of drops as well. Bubble Mew was selling for $700 US at one point, right now selling for $576. There definitely has been people saying, hey, I'm not comfortable paying that price. Now, where these cards are gonna level out, no one knows right now. I do think that there has been so much euphoria in the hobby, and there's been just a lot of growth throughout all of 2025, and there's been very tiny dips. I'm talking like very small little drops, and then it's been increasing, and it's just been going up because it's like, oh wow, you know, I've just seen all my collection just be in the green zone. I've just constantly bought these cards and they've been going in green. There is going to be harsh lessons that some newcomers will learn, because one of the things, and it's kind of been a cheat code, or people kind of thought that they mastered a cheat code because they're like, hey man, I just buy Pokemon cards and they just climb in price. Can you see, like it's so easy, dude, it's so easy. Well, when they start coming down, that's when people freak out. And I think there's going to be a lot of harsh lessons learned throughout a downturn that I do think is going to happen in 2026. A lot of people saying, oh, but the demand, but this, but that. Dude, Pokemon cards have never been as much in demand as this. We have seen Pokemon cards spike in popularity. Yeah, during the pandemic, we saw people, you know, get so excited for cards, but nothing for such a long period of time like this. Like if you remember the Celebrations UPC in 2021, when that came out, that was a very hard product to get. But then Pokemon really fixed that for the Charizard UPC that came the year later. Pokemon was onto that. They like literally made sure that there would be enough product. You know, they printed that thing into the ground. What's happened throughout 2025, it's just been so strong, this demand, and it's kind of lasted so long that now I think in 2026, you know, I do have a feeling Pokemon is gonna be prepared for this, you know. Mega Evolution, which I will show you in a second, the booster boxes are coming down in price. Now, personally, and I'll speak about that in a moment, I do think the booster boxes still have a lot of room to drop. But, you know, when we're looking at these new sets and every new set is selling for like double the retail price, or, you know, some have been going ridiculous price points, right? Like Destined Rivals. It just gets to a point where people are like, you know what, I can't be bothered anymore. I just literally cannot be bothered paying these prices to be involved in a hobby. And of course, now when we're seeing price drops and people are realizing like, wow, hold on, these cards can drop, then you're going to get a lot of people that aren't actually willing to pay $300 for a brand new booster box. No one's really had that brake pedal, and you didn't really need that brake pedal as well for a long time, because it's just endless growth. Now, moving on to the Solosis, this is a really good one and such a key lesson for collectibles. Was selling for $10, went all the way up to $63, you know. Ugh, just Booger Mew, ladies and gentlemen. That is Booger Mew stats right there. A hyped card for the sake of it. And of course, now it's dropped down to $33. And I do think that's going to continue to drop because, you know, just because it has the same illustrator as Bubble Mew doesn't really put it in that category as of yet. And moving on to another really interesting one, you can see the Seismitoad was selling for $150, went all the way up to $221. Seismitoad is right now selling for $180. And I think, you know, people are realizing like, wow, the volatility. If we do, and this is just my intuition, if we do see these prices drop, you know, for a longer period of time, I'm talking like at least 2 months, I think a lot of confidence will be lost in terms of Pokemon cards and, you know, purchasing them and seeing this crazy growth. When I was making, you know, content about Pokemon investing, this was like when I started, 2024, early 2024, I started this channel, right? When I started making content about that, Pokemon investing and, you know, the kind of principles of it, there was no such thing as buying a booster box and seeing that booster box climb in price within a few weeks. That just didn't happen, okay? It was kind of more like if you bought a booster box, you kind of had a very long time horizon. I'm talking 3, 4, 5 years where you think that that would have climbed in price. Now what's happened, and it's become really chaotic, is that people buy booster boxes, you know, 1 month, and then 3 months later, it's selling for triple the price, you know, like kind of like Destined Rivals, right? When you're seeing kind of things like that, that's when the hobby's got this crazy amount of volatility. People are just thinking Pokemon cards are endless growth, and you're getting just a lot of newcomers, especially, you know, a lot of the people that have kind of joined the hobby in 2025, they're just buying cards and they're just seeing growth, and they're just like everyone thinks that they've figured out this cheat code. And, you know, not to sound like a cynic, but I do want Pokemon cards really to have a massive pullback at the moment. The big reason I want that is because I think you need to kind of clear out the weeds, right? It's kind of like pruning a plant. It's just gotten way too messy, and I kind of feel like we need a new season to start. We need all of this and all. It's like, you know, when you're playing a competitive video game and they just introduce all these crazy things and there's been so much power creep, and then they need to reset the meta to kind of like stop what's kind of happened, because, you know, it's kind of like a boiling frog, the boiling frog analogy. You've just had all this garbage, you know, jump on top of each other one after another, and now we're in this big mess, and like everyone's just like standing back and looking at it. It's like, wow, how did it get like this? Well, we need that reset. We need that prune period to come in. We need a kind kind of big shedding of the skin, as the snakes like to call it, where all this stuff kind of goes away, let that all come out and, you know, get a new, fresh kind of vibrant energy for 2026. That's what I'm hoping for. Whether or not that's going to happen, we'll have to see, but that definitely is something that I'm hoping will happen throughout the year because, like I said, it has gotten pretty out of hand. Now also, if you do have questions about Pokemon cards, it's always good to speak with the Pokemon community, and a great place is my channel's official Discord server. You'll also be first in line to hear about upcoming streams and giveaways. You can find the server invite in the video's description. And here we go with the Mega Evolution Enhanced Booster Box. We can see a top of the market of $319 for a brand new booster box, mind you, and currently selling for $255. I still think there's a big room for that to come down in price. And, you know, I just miss the days of spending like 100 or 110 US on a booster box. Those days probably won't come back because, you know, retail price has gone up. But of course, you know, like still, it might come down. I think it just depends if, you know, stock is sitting on shelves. Stock is not sitting on shelves at the moment. So, you know, stores can charge what they want. But, you know, like I like collecting Dragon Ball. I was talking about Dragon Ball earlier, right? All the Dragon Ball sets, you know, that I've seen, like they sit on shelves. So what happens, you know, Black Friday sales and, you know, when there's an end of financial year sale or Boxing Day, they all come down in price. You know, you're getting them, you know, sometimes people are selling those at a loss because, you know, there's not enough demand. Now, obviously, you don't want that to happen as well because you want the hobby to have a healthy amount of people in it. But at the same time, it is nice to see, you know, some other TCGs don't always have that endless like linear growth, and hopefully Pokemon can get a little bit of the demand to calm down, but of course we're gonna have to see how it plays out. The big thing that I'm kind of focusing on at this stage is that Pokemon TCG Pocket boom that I was talking about. Pokemon TCG Pocket, there's a lot of content creators and people speaking that, you know, it's kind of dying out. You know, people are saying, oh, it's losing so many player base right now, like so many people aren't playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. Now I can't really speak about this because I don't play the game myself, but you know, I have seen a lot of people saying that, you know, it's losing player base, right? It's just way too convenient that you have a game that gets so many millions of downloads and so many people start playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. It's just a natural kind of progression point where people play the physical trading cards and then get interested in the physical TCG. I remember when I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh's Master Duel in 2022, I started, you know, buying Yu-Gi-Oh cards straight away because I was playing, you know, the online client. Like I wasn't even, I was buying competitive cards to play in a tournament. And I've never even played like a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament since I was like 12 years old, right? But you know, the thing that happened there, like how Masters all made me buy Yu-Gi-Oh cards, probably a very similar thing has happened throughout this year where all these pocket players have said, you know what, I want to buy the physical TCG. Though, if it is true that there's a player base leaving and, you know, maybe Pokemon TCG Pocket isn't growing as much, you know, maybe this huge kind of amount of hype that's happened and all these people have entered, they're going to be leaving, they move on to different things. And hey, maybe that can also cause prices to come down. But of course, we have to see how it plays out. This will make much more sense, you know, probably around middle of 2026, but of course, let's see how it goes. And just an interesting one here, Paldea evolved, and you can see selling for $475 a booster box and now selling for $404. That has never, well, actually, I cannot remember a time seeing sealed product drop like that without a significant reprint. That is, you know, crazy, actually, because usually when there is a massive, massive drop in sealed booster box prices, it's because a huge reprint or a wave 2 reprint has entered the market. You know, I'm thinking Pokemon 151, the Japanese booster box, you know, selling for like 180 US, dropped all the way down to 60 US, though the market knew why that happened. Lost Origin booster boxes, late 2022, they were climbing up in price, and then there was a reprint around middle of 2023. Lost Origin really started coming down in price. This is a bit bizarre, a little bit of a thing that's kind of showing that, hey, you know, maybe it was too expensive for a sealed product. Like I said, Paldea Evolved, cool set. Whether it's $500 a booster box or $474, what you saw before, whether or not it was worth that much, I don't know. The market's deciding, hey, there is a brake pedal, which is good to see because, you know, there was no brake pedals before. I'm just curious to see where the hobby goes from here. There's going to be interesting things that happen, but, you know, more and more people are now thinking, is it now time to sell? You will get people who panic sell, which will be fantastic for a lot of people who are collecting. But can that panic selling turn into a bit more fear? Can people start really kind of panic selling and just like the fear creeps in and everyone starts selling their collections? I don't know at this point. Probably not going to happen, you know, that quickly. But then again, we just have to see how the hobby plays out within the next year. But I mean, whether selling or not right now is a good idea really depends on your goals. And I think the market is a little bit overinflated due to the non-stop growth we've had throughout this year. But who's to say another hype wave won't come around, you know, when the 30th anniversary releases. I mean, that's the thing with Pokemon cards. They're so cyclical that it becomes very challenging to predict what's going to happen next. But I think one thing that's very important is to learn some important lessons about the Pokemon hobby. And I feel as a newcomer, this information is very important. And you can actually learn all about that within this video on screen right here. Within this video, I actually go over the 7 tips for Pokemon collecting. You can click the video that's currently appearing on screen to learn more about that there. I really appreciate you watching the channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.